Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Barry Rosen. We're going to have a kind of our first class on finding your blind spots, moving beyond the Maya of the mind. Usually what I do is, many of you have been to college, and the first day of class is you have to get kind of an overview of everything that you're going to do. And at the same time, sometimes there's a lot of important information. So actually, we're going to learn a lot of wonderful things today, and I call this lesson kind of the ocean in a drop, because I'll probably share a little bit of the 15 or 16 lessons that we'll just have little brief points on them. So that'll be kind of wonderful. I tend to not like to take questions in the middle of my presentation. I will pause at points in the presentation to rest, and I can open up the mic for questions. And usually on GoToWebinar, you have this kind of orange mic, and I'll unmute all of you, and you have to kind of click on the orange mic, and it'll turn green to speak. Sometimes it's under audio settings. I have a different panel as a presenter, but it's usually pretty easy to find. I have trouble managing the chat box. You can put things in the chat box. At some point I will try to look in there, but I might not get to them right away, but that's always a possibility. And I'm hoping, that I try to make these presentations shorter, so I'm hoping that we'll be out of here within an hour and a half. That's kind of the situation. Again, most of you know me at my website, appliedvedicastrology.com. You know me from Facebook or other Facebook sites, Astro Yoga, Spiritual Astrology, Vedic Astrology Classes by Barry Rosen. You can email me at barry@appliedvedicastrology.com. Let me tell you some information about myself. I've been involved in Vedic astrology since 1987. I've been doing consultations probably since '88. I kind of specialized in financial astrology or investment astrology, and I used to do a lot of mundane astrology. Although I did know a great deal about personal charts, all along. I've had many teachers over the years. When I turned about 60, I started moving away from investment astrology, which I still do professionally, to doing people's charts. And I have more of kind of a spiritual and psychological orientation. I can do prediction. I'm more interested in helping people kind of see their patterns and helping them change their patterns. And I specialize in remedies, and I've just had 40 years or so of healing modalities and working, so many seminars that I always have something useful for everybody. I've written 5 books, including a book on finding your blind spots. The book doesn't really contain very much of the class. The first chapter has maybe a sketchy outline of some of the points that get expanded in the class to maybe 2 hours lectures. But if you don't have the book, you can always pick it up. It's on Amazon, Finding Your Blind Spots. I have a 3rd edition. It's got a lot of other wonderful material in it. I also have like maybe 52 videos on my YouTube channel also, for those of you who like watching YouTube videos. So again, I will pause for questions. And again, my contact information is here, and I've just gone over all of this. Okay, I usually start with some Vedic chanting and to get the gods on our side. So we'll begin with some Vedic chanting. You can just close your eyes and listen. These chants help get coherence into our brain for the class. Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Ganapatiye Namaha, Vakritunda Mahakaya, Surya Koti Samaprabha, Nirvigyam Kurame Deva, Sarvakareshi Sarvada. Jnanamulam Guru Murti, Pujamulam Guru Padam, Panchamulam Guru Vakyam, Mokshamulam Guru Kripa. Om Asatoma Sadgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrichoma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vivishai Vahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Aditaye Samaye Mangale Buddhaye Cha Guru Shukrishani Vischa Rahave Ketave Namaha. Honoring the great ones, Lord Krishna, Goddess Saraswati, Goddess of Wisdom, Vedavyasa, writer and cognizers of the Vedas, my holy tradition of masters, and any special thanks to my Jyotish teachers. So I've kind of, this is the second time I've taught this class, and every time you do something a second time, it's better. And certainly in the last 4 years, I've learned new things. I'm adding 4 or 5, maybe even 6 new lessons to this class, even for those of you who've taken it before. And I have a strong focus on the illusions and the tricks that the mind plays on us, because the essence of Vedic astrology is kind of, the planets come along and we get into fear cycles and anger cycles and false optimism cycles, and we make bad decisions because of that, and then we get into trouble. And so Vedic astrology should reveal what's going on in our mind so that we can kind of witness it more and pull back on it and not get caught up in the illusions that get created. And ultimately, Vedic astrology should lead to self-knowledge and enlightenment, because it should cut the puppet string so we just can witness the craziness of the emotions and the mind. So this is the first class in this introduction. The class starts September 10th or 11th. If there's more people interested in Sunday, I can move the class up to Sunday. I've thought about that. I usually teach on Saturday based on my schedule, but I sometimes have better. Saturday works out well. The new lessons I'm adding are a whole 2 lessons on the blind spots of the planets, understanding the dark sides of planets. So in other words, ego is one of the biggest blocks to enlightenment. I just wrote that wonderful article on my blog this week on levels of ego. So we'll look at that. We'll look at fear. We'll look at jealousy and greed and judgment and things like that. And I have a very spiritual, deep insight into these planets. And then we'll look at how they manifest when they're afflicted. Basically, the dark side, when the planet is pure, it brings out its highest nature. Its archetypal nature. Mars' ultimate nature is service, and service to the king in battle, service to society. And the dark side of Mars, when it gets afflicted, he gets into sexual conquest and violence and anger and all those things. So, but I was starting to see, if you read the article I wrote today, that Mars represents ego and willpower, and you can just see how even in the 12 signs of the zodiac, when it's afflicted and unafflicted, how it manifests. Maybe we'll look into that more deeply. That's kind of new material. Blind spots and zodiacal signs hidden plus by rising signs and moon signs. I've taught that before. We'll do that again. Looking at the blind spots and misperceptions from dashas. Sometimes, if we're in a Jupiter period and we're Libra rising, Jupiter owns like the 3rd and the 6th houses. It tends to give a lot of false optimism, and we tend to kind of, it will feel good, but it will not bring good results, and we'll make a lot of bad judgments. So we need to understand how dashas and even Rashi dashas can change our perception of the world. We'll look at something new, what's called the Bhavachala chart, which is, there's a difference, for those of you know the Bhavachala chart, it's one of the calculations of Vedic astrology, and sometimes the planets will go into different houses. The truth of the matter is always in the Rashi chart. Bhavachala chart may create a phony reality, and I'm not going to talk about that today, but it's a lesson that we will do. We'll look at moon signs. Rahu and Ketu, of course, cause huge blind spots in our chart. We'll spend a couple of weeks on that. The 6th house, a lot of problems with addictions, particularly we'll look at Venus. Other houses, 7th, 8th, and 12th houses, show a lot of unconscious patterns that we just aren't aware of. We have planets in there, we make a lot of mistakes. I've just added a lesson on Logitata Avastyas, which is something new, and we'll talk about that a little bit today. And then Boudica planets. So the dual signs, the Boudica planets are the 7th house. So something like Gemini rising, the Boudica planets, Sagittarius. The fixed sign planets, the Boudica planet is the 9th house, and again, and then the movable signs, the Boudica planet's the 11th house. So 7th, 9th, and 11th houses sometimes have hidden problems for certain rising signs, and there's a lot of wonderful insights you can get from them. They often, when they're afflicted, they often can cause curses. Also look at the Upagrahas and Gulika and Mandi, which aren't studied enough, and they're quite, you can see a lot of amazing things in them. And then we'll have some lessons on remedies. So what did I want to show you here? Okay, so let's move to today's lesson, which is a real lesson. Okay, so I'm calling this lesson the ocean in a drop, because it has like a seed of a lot of the different lessons that we're going to cover in it. Again, I'll for those of you who came a little bit later, I will pause for questions and then I'll unmute you. But for the most part, I like to lecture more, particularly in these overview classes. In our real classes, I like to use your charts, for example. So it's something that we do intimately. So we may only spend like 5 minutes today on information that we may spend 2 to 4 hours on in each class. And then again, even if you have my book on blind spots, they're kind of sketchy outlines that we need to go into more detail on. And most of the material in this class is not in my book. Again, class is officially scheduled to start September 10th at noon, but I will change it to Sunday if more people are interested in it, and we'll do a survey. So our core quest in Vedic astrology is, why am I here on this planet? Why am I suffering? How do I understand my suffering? How do I get out of suffering? How can I lead a better life? And those are the core questions that Vedic astrology should answer. I don't like to think that Vedic astrology is fortune telling. I know a lot of people come to Vedic astrologers for predicting. I think predicting may be important if you have health crises and things, and I am very good at predicting. I teach it, but I feel like ideally Vedic astrology should go deeper to become more spiritual. My favorite movie, Groundhog Day with Bill Murray, if you haven't seen it, watch it again. It's kind of like, do we repeat the same mistakes over and over again? If we don't understand our patterns, we do that. If you remember that movie, Bill Murray's a weatherman in Pennsylvania visiting, and he gets stuck in this nightmare, and he wakes up every day and he has to relive the same day, and he has some free will to do things differently. Initially, he eats 20 meals in the diner, and gets involved sexually with women, and does all kinds of kind of crazy things, tries to drive off a cliff, and nothing will stop the nightmare. And eventually he becomes a better person, and by the end of the movie, he's an artist, he's a humanitarian, he knows how to be in relationship with the woman that he's in love, Addie McDowell, and he wakes up from the nightmare. But we have many lifetimes like that, and the screenwriter for that movie kind of was thinking, oh well, this is maybe 10 lifetimes. It's really more like 50 lifetimes in that movie. But you get the idea that we come in, our weak planets represent our difficult patterns that we haven't learned. If we have a debilitated planet, we haven't learned the lessons of that archetype. If we have an exalted planet, we know that one well. And so the trick is to kind of, sometimes we actually have to work on the weaker planets. We tend to kind of go toward things that we're good at. You know, we have an exalted Mars, or an exalted Sun. We're a naturally good leader, and we kind of, have a lot of confidence, and those are natural, and people are attracted to us, and we get promoted at work. But maybe we have a debilitated Venus, and our relationships don't work, and we tend to spend all our time at work rather than deal with the problems of our relationship and work on them. So the point is, we have to actually work on our weaker planets. Cover this point. The purpose of astrology is not to strike fear into our hearts or to make us very stuck. I'm kind of, it's taken me a long time to understand this. I've, a lot of Western astrologers, they love predicting the end of the world, and some of my colleagues like doing that also. I don't know, astrology was never meant to strike fear into the hearts of life. Jyotish means light, and it's the light of knowledge. It should free us from the grip of our thoughts and our emotions and our fears, so that we become aware and observe them. So I think the most important thing that Vedic astrology can do is that it can create kind of a gyan awareness, so that we can pull back and understand what's going on, and we should. It should help us understand the ways our karma is impacting our emotional and mental world, so that we can free ourselves from it. As my colleague Andrew Frost said, if we can settle the mind down, which we can also do through meditation and spiritual practice, if we have clarity from the astrology, then getting through the problems is very easy. But when we're confused and we don't know what's going on, we're kind of a puppet on the string, and we need to cut the puppet strings. And so Vedic astrology is a spiritual technique to free us from the illusion and such. And we don't want astrology to devolve into fortune telling. Sometimes a good astrological reading can create a Zen observation that enlightens us to see what our thoughts and ego are doing, and it's not us. I mean, you said you get people in a Rahu period, it tends to be very centered on ambition. It uses poor ethics to get to the top. It has no idea what's going on. It gets into addictive patterns. And if you haven't had a Vedic astrology reading in your Rahu period and you're suffering in it, suddenly somebody talks about your Rahu period and explains the nature of it, and then you become conscious of what you need to do to get out of the grip of Rahu. But it takes that awareness. We shouldn't be a victim of the planets. And the whole purpose of Vedic astrology should create freedom, and that's what I hope to do with this course. Again, my spiritual teacher used to say our consciousness is more powerful than the planets, because divinity resides with us and less in the greatness. And so we don't want to become a victim of the planets. I get too many people coming to me, oh, my Saturn's doing this to me, and my Mars is doing this to me, and there's this victim energy with it, and we forget that we're meant to actually to command the planets. We're not to be a victim of them, but we have to raise our consciousness through spiritual practice to do that. And if we don't have spiritual practice, I get people sometimes who don't have any spiritual practice, and they come to me as a fortune teller, and they're definitely in victim mode. What do the planets say? What's going to happen to me? Well, as we get to go on the spiritual path, we have more free will. We see what's going on. Astrology is an advanced technique to kind of free the mind. I have this game that I tell people. People always worry about Saturn and all the problems it's creating. And I just, when I was first getting into Vedic astrology and I had some awareness of it, I was in a difficult sati sat period, and it was kind of paralyzing me every day. And one day I said, Saturn, you can go now. We don't need to play this game anymore. And I felt this kind of wave of energy lifting, because I suddenly I realized my own power to be aware. So we should never be victimized. We can always, once if you're in a Saturn period, or Saturn, you're in sati sat, or Saturn's on top of you, you just have to say, you have to be aware of what energies it's creating, and then you have to say, Saturn, you can go now, and you don't have to become a victim of it. Again, the more spiritual practice we have, the more you can witness things. One of my greatest teachers man named Alina Jaffe used to tell this story about getting to the nature of the mind in the mud. And sometimes in the morning, if you're vacationing and you go out to the lake and it's, you know, just sunrise and the lake is still, there's no boats in it, you know, you can see, look into the bottom of the lake and you see the bottom. You know, maybe you'll see whatever's on the bottom. And as soon as you wander into the lake, you stir up the mud, and the mud, you know, you don't see the bottom anymore. And you know, if we hook up a filtration plant to the lake and tried to get rid of all the mud, we could never get rid of all the mud. So, I mean, our you know, hundreds and hundreds of lifetimes of mud, you know, we can never really totally kind of go through therapy to get rid of it. We can get grace through spiritual practice to transcend it. And, you know, that's kind of a strong focus of mine. But still, I think it's important to understand our patterns so that we can bypass them and not get overwhelmed by them. Now, this term blind spots, I kind of coined it when I was teaching a class at the Sedona Vedic Astrology conference on the 12th house. And if you think, you know, the 12th house is sunrise and the 7th house is sunset. And of course, the 10th house is midday and the 4th house is kind of more midnight. And at sunrise, you know, when you look at sometimes you're kind of blinded. If you're driving into the sun at sunrise, you know, you have to put on your sunglasses and pull down your visor. And more commonly, we're driving west into the sunset, and sometimes we're totally blinded by the sun. And you know, it can be dangerous because you can't see. I'm sure you've had that experience of driving into the sun. You just can't see what's ahead of you. So it's important to you know, be aware of our blind spots, you know, that are connected to planets in the house. Planets in the 8th house also can be unconscious and not see what's going on. So we have to become aware of our thoughts and our emotions. Most of us are victimized by our thoughts and our emotions, but that's not who we really are. We think, you know, we think we're our thoughts and our emotions, but you know, Eckhart Tolle reminds us that 99% of the thoughts that go through our head are nonsense, and especially a lot of the negative thoughts and the fears. And so we have to kind of, you know, remember to witness them and say, oh, there's more garbage coming out, you know. And again, if we don't have enough spiritual practice, we can't do that, and we get overwhelmed. And again, the planets kind of impact our thoughts and our emotions. By the time they manifest on the physical level, causing hospitalization and accidents and really difficult things that we worry about, you know, they've kind of warned us on the mental level, on the emotional level, long before that. And if we're not aware enough to do something about our sabotage patterns or other patterns, then we tend to get kind of, you know, sometimes we have some external event that has to happen to wake us up. Again, we don't want astrology to kind of strike fear into us, and I hate answering these questions like, well, what should I look out for? Well, you know, yeah, maybe 2 or 3 times in your lifetime, if you're, you know, if you're lucky, you have some major life event like a divorce or a hospitalization or some earth-changing event that changes your life, and you needed that event to kind of wake up. And when you look back on that later in life, you're grateful that that happened. I mean, for me, when I was about 28 or 29, I had 20 kidney stones in 1 year, and you know, it was a total wake-up call because it was incredibly painful. And I went to the lab, and the doctor said, you're going to be in pain the rest of your life. And I went to the doctor, to the library as a PhD student, and I realized I needed to get magnesium, and I cured myself. But the point is that we have to, you know, we don't have to have that level of pain to kind of heal ourselves. And astrology can give us awareness of what we need to know. Again, it means light. Astrology should not be about self-blame and self-blame, self-shame and self-blame. We need to step back and stop blaming and shaming ourselves. Ideally, a good astrological self-awareness can create a Zen moment in your chart to wake you up to, who you are and what your patterns are. So we should use astrology to create freedom. I've been watching the transits for 30 years now. I just really I've always known what's going on, and when the fear or the anger or when I see things come up in other people, I can see what's going on, and I don't have to get triggered, and I don't have to get into the self-blame and the self-shame. My friend Juliana Swanson, she has a beautiful quote on astrology and free will. She says, when we wake up, we realize that we are multidimensional beings, and at any given time, there are many possibilities. There are unlimited possibilities seen in the fact that every astrological combination is good for something and bad for something, and has a higher versus a lower expression depending on the consciousness of the person. I get these people that look at their charts and they get totally victimized, and they, how terrible, what a horrible person I am. And I get people who see the beauty in it. And the last course that we just finished, Secret of the Masters, if you went to that first class, I put up a chart of a man who was born during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he had Mars and Saturn and Rahu and Ketu on the 1-7 axis. And if you really looked at the chart superficially, you say, you thought, oh my God, this man's doomed in his relationships. But then if you didn't look at the Navamsha chart, we had Jupiter in the first. And if you didn't know him, he was totally devoted to his wife and a beautiful person. We tend to look for the bad in our charts, and there's always some positive way of looking at it. So it's important to understand all sides. Okay, so I talked about the idea of this course coming from my talk on Activa. Here's I talked a little bit about sunset is the 7th house, and sometimes when we have there are all kinds of ways that the mind plays tricks on us. I call it Maya, which is a word for illusion in Vedic in Sanskrit. A friend of mine had his Rahu and Ketu on the 1-7 axis, and his wife is a saint. She was totally devoted to him, and she was visiting a friend in his spiritual group, and he was totally convinced that his wife was having an affair, and it was not true. And he ended up, this created a divorce and breaking up his family. And I think he still believes that his wife was having an affair, and it wasn't true. This woman was a saint, and I know her. But see, the mind sometimes can get, particularly Rahu and Ketu, they can really grip the mind and create all these illusions, and we think something is very real. And if we don't have an objective reality of what's going on and what's getting triggered, then we make bad decisions. The 12th house, for example, is a difficult house in Vedic astrology because it represents the unconscious. And there's things there that you cannot see. This is a particular area of blind spots. It's all of the dangers are invisible, and we have tended to have a lot of perverted logic in the 12th house, and so planets in the 12th house can cause all kinds of perverted logic and problems. Sun in the 12th house, sometimes we can get blinded by ego and power. We may not see that we're compensating for low self-esteem and lack of confidence. Again, it may depend on what sign and what other planets are connected there. Moon in the 12th house, you get these martyrdom people, self-sacrificing martyrdom mother figures who give up everything, in the sense become codependent, and then their whole life, if they do that for their family or their children go off and never call them again. They're just devastated. Mars in the 12th house can be too quick to intimacy, maybe too aggressive, may have repressed anger, may overcompensate with pushing freedom and end up being controlling but not seeing it. But when you have Mars in the 12th house, you don't see these patterns. You don't realize how controlling you are, out of fear or subconscious fear. Working in the 12th house, you may get stuck in your head, and it's a problem, particularly, for most rising signs. I mean, it may work if you're a Gemini because Mercury is the best planet, and you can kind of, but for the most part, Mercury in the 12th house will be kind of imprisoned in their mind. They may be blind in relationships, become gullible. They may be so wrapped up in their head they don't live in their emotional bodies at all, and it's an imbalanced situation. Jupiter in the 12th house can be overindulgent, not seeing their spendthrifty ways. They could be religious fanatics and not see it. Venus in the 12th house, which I have through a Parivartana yoga, tends to be over finances and sexual activity, and becomes unaware of the consequences. And I've had a pattern. I've made good money in my financial businesses, and I've just kind of have a tendency to spend it in Venus periods or be overindulgent and overspending, and it's gotten me into trouble. Saturn in the 12th house can be kind of blind to saveaholic martyrdom, doing too much service work for others. 12th house is a house of service. Saturn can be that way in the 12th house. It may be blind to the material world and the world of financial reality, and it may not see it. It may just be devoted to getting enlightened, which would be a good thing, but then it doesn't have any doesn't have any feet on the ground. And I meet people in my community who, have been meditating 50 years, but they have trouble paying the rent and they have no retirement money because they've just devoted their whole life. And it could be a good thing. On another level, it's out of balance. Rahu in the 12th house can be blind to unscrupulous or unethical behavior, caught up in the illusion of fantasy about ambition, and disconnected from the reality of what is possible. So again, the 12th house is unconscious. Rahu is unconscious anyway. It's kind of a double whammy, and Rahu's unethical. So it's important, when you're in a Rahu period or you have Rahu in the 12th house, to just be, not cheat on your taxes, just be totally ethical in everything that you do. And most of these people can't because they just don't see they're creating problems, bending the rules or the law. Ketu in the 12th house may have a false sense of holiness. They may live off of others and be unaware that they're doing it. I have a couple of friends like this. They may be disconnected from the world, but they're so obsessed with meditation that they get out of balance. So I don't think any planet does well in the 12th house. They're all blocks to enlightenment and moksha. Okay, I'm going to take a quick pause here just to rest before I go into another section, and I'm going to unmute everybody. If you want to ask a question, you could, this is a little bit different from Zoom. You just have to click on I think Brandon has a question. Okay, thank you for your feedback on having a Sunday class for being better. Anybody else with questions? Okay, I'll continue. I'll mute you all again. Sometimes it's hard to figure out how to unmute the mic. Again, you can type questions in the chat box or the question box, and I will go and look at them. Other types of blind spots that we'll look at. So I don't know if many of you know about what's called the Upagrahas. These are kind of subplanets, and they're very real actually, but most people don't cover, most classes don't cover them. I teach them in my advanced class. So the one that are most talked about are Gulika and Mandi, and they're considered the sons of Saturn, and they're actually fiercer than Saturn, and they can create extreme paranoia. I had a client, and luckily I knew about Gulika and Mandi. I had a client, and she had Saturn transiting over her natal Gulika, and she was frantic that she was going to get thrown out of her house, and that her husband and her were going to have to live on the streets. They were in a difficult situation, but that transit going over her natal Gulika just just, you know, exaggerated the fear and paranoia in her life, and it wasn't real. I mean, you know, they had a lot of friends, they had some income coming in, they had a business that worked and things like that, but they, you know, the sometimes Gulika and Mondi, if we have a key transit to them, particularly Saturn going over them, or maybe another malefic, they can create kind of this extreme paranoia, and we start imagining things that aren't going to happen, and then, you know, this eventually leads to mental illness if it happened for a long time. You know, somebody having Saturn retrograding over their natal Gulika for, you know, 6 or 8 months could end up, you know, in an asylum. I mean, so there's things like that. So it's quite interesting to look at. There are other upagrahas that, you know, for Jupiter and Mercury, for all the planets, and they actually, some of them are quite good. If you have the upagraha for Jupiter, is like a Jupiter point, and sometimes if you have Jupiter going over it, or having your ascendant lord go over it, it could bring all kinds of spiritual blessings, material blessings, and things like that. So these are hidden things in the chart that we'll look at in one of the classes, 2 of the classes. Mental, we have to look at the mind a lot. We will spend a whole lesson on the moon and the afflictions to the moon and Mercury, which have a lot to do with our mental nature. And the 4th house is afflicted. We have a lot of challenges, sometimes with Rahu, Ketu, and Saturn and Mars, particularly. You know, the 4th house is connected to the mind and the heart and the emotion. And so when it's afflicted, sometimes, particularly by Rahu and Ketu, we can get all kinds of distortions and weird paranoia in our minds and things like that. The 25th nakshatra is called the Mananus nakshatra. Whenever Saturn goes over, that's when Sati Sat starts. And we tend to have an abnormal level of fear. So when we have planets going through the 25th nakshatra, if they're malefics, they can really kind of impact the mind. I know before I got into astrology, I had Saturn going over my 25th nakshatra, and it was when I had all these kidney stones, and I dropped out of graduate school and went off and got a job at another university because I just had so much anxiety I needed to change. And I don't know if it was the right thing or not, but it was the influence that came up with Saturn going through the 25th nakshatra. Sometimes false optimism or pessimism from benefics can create problems. I mentioned that. I had a friend who's Taurus rising, and he was in a Jupiter period, and he was a really happy guy, and he smiled all the time, and he felt good because Jupiter period is going to make you feel good. But Jupiter owns the 8th and the 11th houses, and he kept expecting work to get better and money to get better and relationships to get better, and he was really falsely optimistic about all those things, and none of it happened. And eventually, you know, you have kind of this crisis when all the things that you expect to happen don't manifest. And you know, so that's an example of how a dasha period, when it's a functional malefic, could impact you. I had another friend where Saturn was a good period for her. She's Taurus rising, Saturn owns the 9th and the 10th. Good luck with career. Well, she was so depressed from Saturn. She had picked up a lot of depression from her mother. When her Saturn period started, she said, I give up. No one's going to hire me. I'm just going to sit in my room and I'm just going to mope all the time. You know, she really talented person, and wasn't going out looking for jobs. And somebody knocked on the door and offered her this incredible job because they knew how talented she was, and she ended up running this big company. You know, but that's because, you know, Saturn was a functional, it was a good planet for Taurus. It was, even though it was a natural malefic, it was creating natural pessimism. At the same time, it brought results. So we have to understand, you know, dasha periods can do that sometimes. We have to understand what's going on in those periods so that we can overcome those energies. So this is some material from these new lessons that I want to do. One lesson is going to be on ego. It's kind of an extension of what I wrote in the article on the blog today. So, you know, the ego is Mars is about ego and willpower, and there are many shades of ego. Ego is usually our biggest block to, can be our biggest blind spot. Now, Mars in its purest form is about selfless service to the king, being in the military to serve your country, and even selfless service to your spiritual teacher to get enlightened. And if your Mars is really strong, it can move in that direction. Inevitably, as I tell everybody, most of the planets have some affliction in the chart. I mean, it might in the D9 and the Navamsha chart, there may be a malefic aspect, maybe in a difficult nakshatra, may have some difficult Gemini aspects. So I rarely find pure planets that, are just here to kind of, when you do have absolutely pure planets, then they express the full archetype of the planet, and then they allow us to share our gifts with the world. So like you think about Mars and Aries, the dark side, usually the planet is afflicted. So dark side of Mars and arrogant is arrogant and has a lot of pride in doing stuff. I have Mars and Aries. I would say it's afflicted. It's a good planet for me on any levels, but my life is about doing and accomplishing. And if I work a lot, if I get a lot done, I feel good about myself. But that is kind of a false ego on some lesson. I get out of balance. I don't spend enough time with my wife. I don't have enough fun, and in a sense, but my ego is stuck in doing a lot so I feel good about myself. That's kind of a false ego. Mars in Taurus tends to be kind of have a bodybuilder ego, or into looking good, or into sexual conquest. I have some friends like this, and Arnold Schwarzenegger has Mars in Taurus. He's an early bodybuilder, but in the 12th house, some people, our whole life is about how we look to others. If we think we look good, then maybe they won't think see inside that we're suffering, or we're depressed, or we don't feel good about ourselves. And so, Mars and Taurus, the ego is an expression of looking good, and that kind of thing. Mars and Gemini, likes to fight to be right. You think about, that's the dark side of Mars and Gemini. Mars and Gemini can be a good engineer, a good computer programmer, but they can get into arguments if Mars is affected, particularly if Mercury and Mars are together. And our whole country is devolving into two worlds now, because I'm right and you're wrong, and it's the biggest block to enlightenment. When I grew up, we accepted different opinions, and even one of my friends said, "You have the right to your opinion," which is a kind way of saying, I disagree, but I'm not going to fight with you for an hour so that because I'm right. But you get people. What's happening to our whole world now is like, people are doing all kinds of crazy things because they think they're right, and they'll do anything to be right and to advance their opinion. And it's a really kind of difficult ego that kind of blocks, I'm right, you're wrong. I mean, it's really kind of an ugly part of ego. Mars in Cancer, I find these people can be shy, they're codependent, they don't feel good enough. Again, Mars is debilitated in Cancer. I mean, again, these are all generalizations, because is the planet afflicted by a malefic? Is it conjunct a benefic? Does it have good aspects? So it's always, what nakshatra is it in? What navamsha is it in? So there are all kinds of subtleties that we have to look at. But again, we have the low aspect of the archetype here, because if Mars feels good enough, then it has good self-confidence. It's going to go into battle. It's going to be courageous. It's going to take risk, and it's going to achieve. And people who have a weak Mars or low self-esteem are not able to be in their own business, or to take risk, or they're not sure. They think they're going to make a lot of mistakes. It's a problem. Mars and Leo, maybe pride and success in doing. Leo is a very kind of success-oriented, being the CEO, being the leader, and there's a lot of pride in being a leader. But anyway, these are subtleties. I wrote a whole if you want to go into this, I wrote a whole long article in today's blog about it. Some of you may have seen it, and there are deeper aspects of it that we need to cover. You can also look at Saturn and fear. Get Saturn afflicted by Rahu, you get paranoia. Saturn afflicted by Gulika. We just talked about extreme terror and paranoia. Saturn in Aries, restless spirit and anxiety, kind of run around like that. So there's levels of anxiety and fear, and you know, we can look at Saturn in different signs and see how our you know, how fear is kind of gripping our mind in different ways. And these things are a lot more complex than that, but it's some new material I want to explore because we have to learn how to kind of step back from all these things. There's a beautiful quote from one of my favorite books, Emmanuel's book. It's in one of my books. Fear is a trick, a sham, a sleight of hand. It is illusion. The master magicians are heavy at work in your world. Demand to see up the sleeve, expose the magician for fear as humbug. There's a natural fear and resistance when one does not recall one's own divinity. You are safe, you are safe, you are infinitely safe, oh my dears, if I could only make it possible for you to experience the loving, gentle kindness of the universe, the balance and the fairness, the sweetness and the joy, there would never be another moment of fear in your entire lives. You have to really look closely at fear because, you know, fear is the biggest block to enlightenment also, because the fearless mind is, the fear mind just, you know, 98% of the things we fear never happen, and yet fear kind of runs our life. It prevents us from doing things. I've been involved with a new spiritual group, and they were able to give me this kind of taste of enlightenment one evening. And it happened in February during this horrible snowstorm in Iowa. And when I came out, you know, it was drifting and you couldn't see the roads. And this is one of those nightmares. And I'm not one that enjoys driving the snow, but because I had this incredible experience of enlightenment that it was gifted me for that evening, I was totally fearless. Totally knew I would get home safely, and I just drove home with confidence, knowing that I was taken care of. And it's kind of a deep reminder of our natural state is fearlessness. It's about and yet, you know, fear kind of runs us, and we have to move beyond that. I'm getting a message from. Can you all hear me? Okay. Sometimes the internet, if the internet does go down, once in a while it does. I got a message that there is a problem, and please let me know. I just turned off the web camera. We lost the connection, so, oh geez. It will come back on. If it doesn't, I will. Okay, I think we're back. You know, Afi, can you hear me now? Can somebody confirm that the sound is back? You know, the camera went off. Camera is not going back on. Once in a while, the system goes down and I have to reboot. Do apologize. I'm not ready to do that yet. Afi, do we have sound?
Yes, Barry, I was muted. Yes, we've had sound the whole time.
Okay, great. Okay, so I apologize. I get, once in a while, the system will go down for like 10 seconds and it gives me a message. Okay, thank you for confirming that. Okay. Anyway, I was telling you about fear, and we have to move beyond fear, and it's one of the biggest blocks to the mind, and most of the time it's false. Jupiter, judgment's another kind of aspect. Jupiter is connected to judgment. Again, we talk about, I find that Jupiter in Libra or Taurus tends to be naive and gullible. I mean, once in a while it may have strength in the D9 chart or some other thing propping it up, but these people are very happy, and it's beautiful. My wife has Jupiter in Libra. It's a very beautiful placement. At the same time, they don't have good judgment to see the truth, and they may have a false sense about hope which, you know, can be a problem. People with Jupiter in Capricorn have like false optimism, and they, you know, Jupiter, when it's debilitated, you know, it doesn't lose its happiness and its optimism, but it has optimism about things that it shouldn't. It doesn't have good judgment. And so there are so many ways that the planets, when they get out of balance, create false judgment and play tricks on us. Blind spots by rising sign. So we'll have a lesson on this. An example of this is, let's say, Virgo rising. Saturn owns the 5th and 6th houses, and Virgos tend to have this perfectionist quality because Saturn owns the 5th and the 6th houses, and they have particular problems with their children not being good enough or perfect enough, and that creates problems with their children, or it may be in romance. 5th house is romance. And again, the key, every Virgo I know, just particularly if they have Saturn in the 1st house, it's just particularly difficult, and they criticize their partners to death, and they expect everybody to be perfect, and then they eventually destroy all their relationships. And the key with Virgo, of course, is just acceptance of the imperfections of life. Nothing's perfect, and Saturn wants it to be perfect, and it never will be. But look, every rising sign has kind of these kind of blind spots, and you know, for Virgos, it's for Tauruses, sometimes it's I can remember all these off the top of my head, but we all have, all the signs have blind spots. We'll have a lesson on that. Rahu. Rahu causes the most blind spots, obviously. Again, we can be unaware of our unethical behavior. And sometimes that could be, you know, many people have a lot of honesty, but they may copy and paste something that they shouldn't be copying and pasting it without giving copyright. They may, you know, they may be unaware of the way they're kind of hurting something. I mean, I had a friend of one of my clients who was in a Rahu period, and you know, Jupiter in Sagittarius rising, but she's in a Rahu period, and she got involved with a boyfriend who dealt drugs and was making crystal meth, and they got arrested. And you know, even though she's an ethical person, she was kind of blinded by Rahu and her love for her Rahu boyfriend, who's kind of was a gangster type, and she almost went to jail. You know, it's kind of you have to be aware. Rahu can kind of create these kind of false illusions that you're doing something right, but you're not. You know, Rahu is always about craving, so we know with cravings, they never go away. I mean, as much sex as we crave and get, we want more. As much chocolate pudding we want, if we want more. So the trick with Rahu is you have to kind of, you know, realize your cravings and let go of it. Rahu also will create phoniness in whatever house it lands in, and we kind of pretend that we know something about the house that Rahu is in, but in reality, you know, we're just kind of making it up and pretending that we know a lot about something like that. You know, this can be Rahu in the 10th house, which is considered a good placement. You know, some people can rise in position, but you know, when you get to know them, they're really not good leaders, and they kind of pretend to be good leaders, but then they really aren't. So you know, there are all these kind of levels of phoniness that Rahu can create, and part of wherever Rahu is learning to move beyond phoniness and be authentic. And also with Rahu, we have to move beyond fear and paranoia. It usually just creates a lot of craziness in the mind and a lot of fears that never manifest. Addiction, you know, addiction's kind of a blind spot also, because we're actually aware of our addictions, but we can't seem to be aware of how to move through our addictions, what's causing it. Usually, you know, with food addictions and alcohol and drug addictions, you know, it's connected to the 2nd house and not having enough love from family. I often find people with Mars and Rahu in the 2nd house, the family didn't nurture them enough, and they turn to tobacco or alcohol or drugs or food addiction to kind of take away the emotional anxiety from the lack of nurturing. It's quite fascinating. I have a whole class which is quite intriguing on Venus in the 6th house, relating to sexual addictions and sexual pleasure addictions, and it's quite fascinating that, you know, depending on what sign Venus is in the 6th house, there are different layers of addiction. And it's quite fun to look at. And we'll also look at the vices of the 6th house, greed, jealousy, anger, fear, and things like that. And these are all kind of things that kind of block our happiness. Baudica. Now, Baudica means block, and Sanjay Roth talks about it. Even if you have 2 malefics aspecting your Baudica house or planet, it can actually be like a curse. It's just something you can't get through. For the dual signs, Gemini, Sagittarius, Virgo, and Pisces, the 7th house is the Baudica planet. So they all have all the dual signs have relationship problems. They can't quite seem to get through them. It's just kind of a natural archetypal pattern for the dual signs. The movable signs, Libra, Aries, Capricorn, and Cancer, have problems with the 11th house Lord, and so those problems sometimes manifest as problems with friends and groups, and you know, other difficult 11th house issues. Usually it's more friends and groups. 11th house shouldn't really be looked at for income. There's something else that we should look at for income from the 11th for income. The 9th house is connected to fixed signs, Baudica fixed signs. So Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius are the fixed signs. The 9th houses from them have Baudica, and that one's kind of hard to kind of understand because the 9th house is a lucky house. It's a good luck house, but usually the Baudica element may manifest as problems with the father or gurus, or it may be I have 9th house Baudica in my 1st house afflicted and created spiritual bypass for me where I'm, you know, it was so much emotional upheaval in my life that I turned to spirituality and gurus to kind of move out of the emotional pain. But it was, you know, eventually it's bypassing rather than dealing with your emotional pain. Sometimes Baudica can be very difficult if there are 2 malefics aspecting the Baudica planet or house, and that can create, it's almost like a curse, and it can create really difficult things. There are remedies for it that will give. The hidden thing about Baudica is that 12th house, the house 12th from the Baudica planet will often show really deep blind spots and karmic things that we've come to fix in this life. In my chart, I will show this. I'm using, I know north and south equally well. I switched to south recently because I can see the Gemini aspects better.
Barry, we can't see the screen where the chart is.
Okay.
Just don't quote on fear.
Oh, interesting. I don't know. Okay, I could turn off. Okay, so is it coming up now?
No.
Okay, so this has never happened, but again, Mercury is debilitated in the Devamsha chart today. Sharing, show screen. Okay, is that coming up now?
No, still stuck on quote on fear.
Don't know. I guess that's important. I've never had this happen with this program. Stop showing. No, wait, hold on. Okay, paused. Okay, it's showing that it's paused. I've never had it do this in 6 years, but don't know. Okay, I'm sorry I can't work through this at the moment. I don't. I've never had it happen in 6 years, and it is showing that it's paused, and I don't know why. It may have paused it because of bandwidth, but okay, there. I think that fixed it. Yeah.
It's still stuck on fear.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
No, it's going on and off. It says on showing screen. I'm hoping it'll switch. Sometimes there's a delay because of the bandwidth. It should be on a slide on. It says that it's showing the screen. I don't know how to. Okay, I'm just going to have to move through, so we'll have to have audio. I can send the slideshow to you. If anybody wants a slideshow, you can email me and I'll send it to you. I'm so sorry.
Or
Okay, so yeah, just saying it's paused again. I've never had this happen. Okay. So Mercury's exalted in Virgo. It's debilitated in the Navamsha chart today, so we know what happens. Funny. Don't know. Okay, I don't know what to do with it. Okay, so anyway, I was just going to show you my chart, but you can't really see it. But in my chart, I have the moon is my Boudica planet in Scorpio in the first house. 12th from the moon, I have an exalted Saturn in the 12th house, and Saturn is the Karka for workers and or employees, and Vedas would say servants. And so I've my whole life I've had problems with employees, and it's kind of a hidden thing from the Boudica planet, 12th from the Boudica planet. Dr. Rashi, I decided not to put in this edition of the class because I'm adding some new things. Dr. Rashi is interesting. But I decided not to cover it the second edition. Blind spots by houses. We'll look at some of that now. So the seventh house is sunset. And anything in this, when you're going into the sunset, you don't see things. Any planet in the sunset, the seventh house is considered kind of dead, and its energies get distorted. Again, if you have a chart of Adolf Hitler, I will pull that up, and I'll talk about his chart in a second. Not somebody I usually like to focus on, but he's just a perfect example of blind spots. Okay, Adolf Hitler's chart, his Libra rising, for those of you who don't know the chart, he's got Mercury, Venus, Sun, and Mars in Aries in the seventh house. So he's got Mars having a lot of dignity in the seventh house. He's got Sun exalted in the seventh for the leadership. It's a degree or two from exaltation at 8 degrees. He's got Mercury, which is a good planet for Libra, Lord of the ninth in the seventh. He never got married, and he's got a retrograde Venus in Aries, which is the Atmakarika. He didn't get married until I think the day he died in the bunker. He actually had a lot of his planetary war between Mars and Saturn, between Mars and Venus in his chart. But in any sense, the interesting thing is that all this kind of blind ambition and military prowess and killing people, it was like he just wasn't even aware what he was doing. He's also got Rahu in the ninth, so he just lack of ethics about what's right and wrong. Rahu's exalted there for kind of his charisma. Saturn in the 10th for success in career. But again, a very difficult, a lot of blocks in his seventh house. And the sun gets, his leadership, gets distorted. His military prowess gets misused. His aggressive and evil qualities of Mars gets misused. And so it's quite fascinating chart. I assume we're still not seeing it. I don't know what's going on here. Okay. relations to the 4th and the 5th house to Mercury, Moon, and Jupiter. So the mind planets Mercury, Moon, and Jupiter. Jupiter is judgment, the Moon is the mind, Mercury is the intellect, and 4th house is the mind, the 5th house is judgment, 25th nakshatra is also the mind. So we get a lot of malefics in these houses, Rahu damage in the 4th and the 5th houses. We just have a lot of problems with judgment. Saturn and Ketu in the 5th house have poor judgment. Mars may be rash in judging. Rahu in the 5th house may create judgments that are based on ethics. Okay, we have a problem with the network connection. I can change to my hotspot. I don't know if I can do it in the middle of.
The screen started moving now, Barry.
Oh.
So it's on blind spot and houses now.
Okay. So there's something. Anyway, my computer's playing tricks with me today, but again, the audio is fine. Okay, I'm glad that the video is working. Did you see the chart of Hitler that I just did? Is that showing up now?
Yeah, I can see it now.
Okay. Yeah, so I was talking about Hitler's got the 7th house is sunset. He's got 4 planets in the 7th house. So all those planets are just distorted. He was a leader, but he was a kind of a distorted leader. You know, he had incredible military might with Mars and Aries, Jupiter in Sagittarius, but again, it was all misused, and his relationships were a mess. Never got married until the day he died. Although he had plenty of sex, you know, anybody he wanted, of course. But again, not. And the other thing is, you know, he was an artist, and he used to paint, and you know, his dharma may have been more to be an artist, and it was never realized. He's got the A5, the root of the 5th house here. His dharma was never realized to be an artist because, you know, Venus is the Atmakarika, it's in planetary with Mars. Instead, Mars seemed to win over, you know, the dark side. Logitata Avastyas. I had hoped to teach this last time in the first edition. I just realized I like doing new things, so I'm going to add at least 1 lesson, if not 2. Logitata Avastas, Parashar talks about them a lot, are specific planetary combinations that explain the state of a planet. They may explain the real reason why Saturn can be so difficult. I mean, Saturn's not always cruel. He can have great focus, determination, do a lot of hard work. I have an exalted Saturn. That's what I'm able to do. It gives you strength in your immune system and detachment. I have all those strong qualities of Saturn because it's in Libra. But sometimes if Saturn gets mixed up in the wrong sign or with another planet, it can bring out frustration, sorrow, illness, and delay. So Parashar goes into great detail with the Avastyas on how the planetary combinations by sign and conjunction can impact and create imbalances to the planet. So something we're going to add to the course. Some new material for those of you who need new material. Other types of blind spots, I think we've talked a little bit about dasha blind spots. Rahu periods are always, and Ketu periods are always kind of totally skewed. Jupiter periods, if they're owned by, if you're Taurus or Libra rising, or even a Saturn Capricorn rising, can be kind of a mess. You know, you may, you know, I mean, I have a colleague who's in the Taurus period. She's a Taurus rising in a Jupiter period, and she means really well, and but she can't keep her word about anything, and she's not even aware of the problem. She's hopeful that things will keep working out, but they never quite do. So you've got this problem with that Saturn. I talked about that, my friend who got offered a job even though she was depressed and hiding in her home. Mars can be a functional benefic for Cancer and Leo rising, but it's still a natural malefic, and we have to understand how that functions. Sometimes these people can be too aggressive at work and be too ambitious. They're very competent, but then it creates problems with their coworkers. Jupiter, we've talked about. The fifth house is about judgment. Do we learn from our mistakes? To me, this is, this is Groundhog Day. If we have a very weak fifth house, if the fifth house lord is poorly placed, let's say in the 12th or the 8th, or if we have malefics like Rahu, Ketu, Mars, and Saturn in the fifth house, then we just don't learn from our mistakes. And if we don't learn by our mistakes, it's Groundhog Day, and we end up like Bill Murray, just kind of suffering. The whole purpose is to move beyond suffering. Mercury, again, is our intellect. We often find that Moon-Mercury combinations will create a confusion between the emotions and the intellect. And we have to remember that if you're Gemini or Virgo, you should be favoring Mercury, which is your 1st and 10th house lord, and your 4th house lord, and it should be, it's your natural nature to use your intellect, and your emotions get in the way. I find that Geminis have a real problem with their emotions, and if Moon and Mercury get mixed up, sometimes the Moon's in Mercury's nakshatra, Mercury's in the Moon's nakshatra, and those are mental aberrations. Then they create kind of emotional and mental imbalance and poor misjudgment and communication. So very common thing, and learning to get through that is we'll give you remedies for that. Third house is primal mind. It's I don't know if it's unconscious, but in some ways it is unconscious because it represents, the third house represents the Freudian id. It's our subconscious move towards sex and aggression and protection. Mars is the natural karka of the third house. So Mars governs adolescence and the need to kind of protect our territory. It's a primal drive. Sometimes that leads to violence. You don't like Mars in the third house. It's too strong. Venus in the third house is too strong a sex drive. Planets in the third house often get out of control, and so we'll have to look at that in the primal mind also. Seventh house we talked about represents our back. It's a true blind spot. We really can't see what's going on. Again, seventh house is relationship. I often find that people who have relationship problems have back problems. So if we don't resolve our relationship issues, then we end up going to the chiropractor and we have back pain and we get spinal surgeries because we haven't dealt with resolving our relationship issues. Very interesting in the way that works. Eighth house is a interesting house too, mystical transcendental realm. We have deep past karma, which is hidden, which causes us pain when it manifests into acute illness and accidents or divorce. It's a very mystical house. It's a really difficult house when we have malefics in there, Saturn, Rahu, Ketu, and Mars really cause a mess there. The benefics actually will do pretty well there, but we eventually have a lot of unconscious patterns that come up in the eighth house, and if we don't understand them, then we end up in the hospital, or we end up with a divorce, or something, particularly with malefic. They're in a malefic eighth house period. Factors that disturb psychology. Look at this in the lesson on the moon. So we put the moon in the 6th, 8th, or the 12th house. Again, we never like any planets in the 6th, 8th, or the 12th house, and the moon doesn't do very well there. The moon in the 8th house is particularly difficult because it doesn't express its emotions, and it ends up being all bottled up. We don't like the moon aspected or associated with Mars, Saturn, Rahu, or Ketu. Distorts our mind quite a bit. Mars creates anger, Saturn depression, Rahu and Ketu psychic vulnerability and psychic sensitivity. People get Ketu moon conjunctions, they're psychic, but put it in the wrong sign like Taurus or something, they have too much mental noise and they feel everybody's psychic energy when they go to a party and they can't function. I've had clients like that. Rahu, Saturn, aspecting the moon can create severe psychological health disturbances, paranoia, fear, disturbance, sometimes mental illness. Not always. Mars, Saturn to the moon can destroy emotional happiness, but lead to seeking spiritual life because of it. Okay. Okay, I wanted to keep this presentation brief because I know you all have your Sundays to enjoy. I do have this. So I want to invite you to sign up for the course. And again, I'm just getting a notification. The sound's going out. Affy, do we have sound again?
No, we've had sound the entire time.
It's just, okay, so Mercury's playing a trick on me, giving me this warning that the internet's going to go out, but I don't know what to do with it. The class starts on September 10th or 11th. If I get more people that want to take it on Sunday, I will do it live on Sunday. I always record the classes. If you're going to miss a class, you will always get a makeup 2 hours afterwards as soon as the course is over. Go to webinar automatically. We'll send you a copy of the tape to listen to if you have to go somewhere or enjoy the fall. Live classes are wonderful because you get to ask questions, and we'll use your charts as examples. I get to know my students' charts very well. My classes tend to run about $25 a class. There's going to be about 15 or 16 lessons in this class. I always end up adding more. We started out with an 8-lesson course this summer, and people got 12 lessons. So I tend to charge $25 a class. Discount is $349. Payment plans are welcome. I mean, most people have cards and credit cards, and they pay off their own card. If you need a special payment plan, I can arrange that for you through PayPal. I usually like payments at least divided by 3. I can go 4 if you need to. If you have any special needs, talk to me. Again, I don't make a lot of money teaching these classes, and it's not my main source of income. The sign up, I'll send you a link for it. You can email me also. But and I'd like to open up to questions now. Again, I was trying to keep the presentation brief. I tend to talk fast, so I could have gone through that a little bit more slowly, but I'm going to unmute you all, and you can either type in questions or you can get on the mic by turning your orange mic green if you're having trouble with the mic. So Maddie, I think had a question. They are okay. So Renee was able to see all the slides, so that's interesting. Thank you for letting us know. Again, the computer was playing tricks. Okay. Do you all know how to get on your mics or put questions in the chat? While you're thinking of questions, Affy, did you want to share your experience? Affy's been a student with me for about 3 or 4 years. Do you want to share your experience with my classes, Affy?
Absolutely. So I've been a student of Barry's astrological classes for about 4 years, and want to talk about some of the experiences that I've had, but also some background about Barry. As you learned earlier, he's got 50 years of practicing astrology, Vedic astrology. 32 years of that has been teaching astrology. He's written 5 books, and he's correct. He's expanded his teaching to psychology and spiritual aspect of astrology. How I find Barry as a teacher is that he's always generous with his time, with his knowledge, with his skills and experience. He's authentic. His classes are part lecture and part collaborative. He uses examples. He uses the students' charts if they're comfortable with using charts as examples. I find him to be well prepared for his classes. He's extremely patient. So if you get something wrong or if you don't understand it, he'll explain it again and use examples. He's very empathetic and he's a considerate teacher. And so I've loved and enjoyed, taking Barry's classes. I've learned so much from him. It's incredible. I highly encourage, and plus the classes are so reasonably priced. So, all positive experiences.
Yeah, I'm definitely undercharging on my classes. It's mainly because I have other sources of income, it's my passion for doing it. And I know there are a lot of people who can't afford these classes. That's why we have a payment program. But I've paid $1,800, $1,000 for, when I've taken classes from other people, and sometimes I spent hours trying to figure out what they said. So one of my gifts is being clear and being coherent and making it simple. And then I also always give you the PowerPoint notes so that you can go over them. I send the PowerPoints ahead of time. I encourage you to, study ahead. Sometimes, because this is the second edition of the class, there are some original tapes that I will send to you ahead of time. So if you want to watch it before class, then when you get it the second time, it's clear. In Vedic astrology, sometimes we have to learn things twice before we get them, especially if they're new things. So you'll have that opportunity with some of the older tapes, which are very good still, but they're just, 4 years later, I have 6 or 7 new lessons that I'm adding, and I will revise some of the material that I presented before. So it's a very rich experience. Again, this is my favorite thing of the week to do, and I'm very passionate about it, and that's why I do it. I mean, like I said, there's not a lot of money teaching at $25 a class, but do join me. If you have any questions, you can email me at Barry@Applied Vedic Astrology. I will send you a link for signing up for the class. It's also in the newsletter. If you get our daily newsletter, our weekly newsletter. And again, there's an early bird by the day after Labor Day, September 4th at $349. After that, it's $395. So again, if you need payments, let me know. Anybody have any questions? I know sometimes it's hard to figure out how to use the mic here.
Hi, Barry.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yes, I just wanted to know if the classes will be in the same technical format on GoToWeb, or do we use? Okay.
Yeah, the classes will be on GoToWebinar. One of the reasons I don't use Zoom, although I have Zoom and everybody uses Zoom, is that you start seeing everybody and everybody's looking at everybody during the class. I know one of the things that we learned in the pandemic is that we're all voyeurs, and when we get bored, we look at everybody on Zoom. And it's kind of fun, but it's also distracting. So I'm going to go with GoToWebinar, and I can't do. I can do. You're all panelists on GoToWebinar, so you'll be able to use the mic and get on at any time. I can't have multiple cameras on GoToWebinar. I can have one at a time if we need to. I can switch if somebody wants to be spotlighted to present something or to be shown. And most of us have gotten used to kind of being in our underwear on Zoom, and we don't have to put on our makeup if or something. So that's one reason I don't use Zoom. It gives you more anonymity if you want. GoToWebinar also automatically sends stuff to you. Elizabeth, you had a question? Okay, I'm having trouble hearing somebody. Somebody's wanting to talk, and let me try to unmute you all again. Sometimes you have to put your mic on, go to audio and check the settings to see if your mic's on. Deepu, are you trying to speak now?
Yeah. So Barry, I have a question that you said that Mars in 12th house gives quick with intimacy, and So, but then we have one saint, Ramakrishna Paramhans. He was a great Indian saint. He had Mars in 12th house in Capricorn, and he was a kind of, though he was married, but he was kind of celibate all over his life. I'm not sure whether you have heard about him, Ramakrishna Paramhans, Vivekananda's guru. So how do we explain the difference in that?
Yeah, it depends on the sign and the nakshatra. I think, you know, Mars is is naturally a celibate. The essence of Mars, the warrior should be a celibate. If he's going to be a good soldier, he can't, you know, he can't use his energy to go to the brothels at night. You know, that often happens with soldiers. But yeah, if Mars has dignity, you know, if it's in, you know, depending on the sign that's in the 12th house, if there are no aspects to it, you know, Mars and Libra in the 12th house or Mars and Taurus in the 12th house would be have more of a problem with that. But you're right. Every aspect of, you know, every little piece of information in Vedic astrology gives us something: sign, nakshatra, position in the Navamsha chart, aspects. And so, yeah, I don't know that chart, but I'm sure there's some offsetting influence. Thank you for that question. Other questions? Maddie had a question, or Elizabeth had a question. Renee has another question. Renee, let me unmute you. Renee, can you get on your mic now? Great.
Yes.
You're there. You're on.
Okay. I think I maybe just didn't lower my hand,
Okay.
but if you have a moment, I would like to see your chart when we weren't able to see it at the Boudica house, which you were saying 12th from the Boudica. I don't know if you're able to show that quickly.
Yeah, okay, here we are again. Okay, so here's my chart, Scorpio rising. The 9th house lord for a fixed sign is the moon. So the moon is the Boudica planet. It's in the 1st house. 12 from the moon shows a lot of hidden subconscious problems that are kind of, you know, we can't get a handle on them. And in my case, it's Saturn. Saturn governs workers, and the Vedas would say servants. Saturn exalted in the 12th house. They say you have a lot of servants. Well, I've had 9 employees at some point, but you know, story of my life is dealing with challenges with employees. Even though I'm a good and generous boss, I somehow end up with very difficult things, and that's also exemplified. And Mars is aspecting Saturn here, so that's there are luckily no other malefic aspects here. If I had 2 malefic aspects to the Boudica planet, then to Saturn, then it would be almost a curse. It'd be just unbelievably difficult. So, you know, that's how that works. Good question, Renee. By the way, just while I remember, I'm speaking on Dr. Pai's channel on Thursday. I don't know if he does it live or not. It's Thursday at noon Central. I'm going to be talking about Atmakarika. And I know, so you can, for those of you who like those Dr. Pai's channel, you can look for me to go up on that channel, or if it is live, maybe it will be on there live. I don't know. Maddie, did you have a question? Let me see if I can get you unmuted here in case you're muted.
I have one more question, Barry.
Yes.
So how do we interpret the result when we have more than one planet in 12th house? How do we interpret the yogas? Because that's a pretty gray area in Vedic astrology. Sometimes the yogas work, sometimes they don't work. So do we have any methodology to interpret those results? Because single planet is very rare to find.
Yeah, I usually try to start by breaking out one thing at a time and then combinations. I mean, Kapil Raj recently put out a book on there are a number of books when you get multiple planets. And I have seen some charts with 4 planets in the 12th house, and their life is usually a mess, and they're really meant to just work on enlightenment on some level. You know, I find 12th house planets are you have to start by deciphering them one by one, and then you can look at the signs and the nakshatras and the planetary combinations. But You know, the problem with Vedic astrology, as you know, it's rather encyclopedic. There's some traditional Vedic text. I have one on my desk here. The Garga Hora. I don't know if the camera's not on anymore. Camera won't go on. It's the Garga Hora. He actually has all these yogas by house for up to 6 planets. The problem I find with a lot of these ancient texts is that they give these ancient interpretations, like, you know, you'll have many cattle and you know, or something like that, you know. So you have to kind of rewrite them for modern ages. But there are books like, you know, even the ancient Vedic texts have, like the Garga Hora has, you know, has multiple. It has 6 planets in the 12th house. Even it does have it by house. So there are Vedic texts that have them. So no one can memorize them all.
What is this book's name? Could you please come again?
Okay, it's a Vedic text. It's called the Garga, Garga, Hora, Hora, by sage Garagacharya. It's a practical interpretation of planetary combinations by Rishi Vikyas. It's an old book I picked up in the 1983.
And who's the interpreter, or who's the translator?
Translated by R. Santhanam, Santh.
Okay, fine. I will find out. Okay,
Now, the other, you can find all these ancient books on scribe.com. A lot of these Indian books, if to tell you a secret, if you subscribe to scribe.com for $9.99, a lot of these ancient texts are on there to download. So, but I don't know if that one's in print or not. I got it in 1989, so I don't know. Okay, thank you. Maddie, do you have a question? I'll see if I can unmute you. So you're self-muted and you're muted by me, so let's see if I can unmute you. I do apologize. Sometimes when we have class, I make everybody a panelist, so you can just get on and off whenever you want. But let me try to get you unmuted. So I've unmuted you. Now click your orange mic, Maddie, and it should turn green and you can speak. Okay, maybe you don't have a question anymore. You can type your question in the chat box or into questions. Okay, good. So final Jeopardy answer here, anybody today? So again, if you have any questions, email me at barry@appliedvedicastrology.com. I'll send you a copy of the videotape if you need to re-listen to it, or if you want to share it with a friend. I look forward to, you know, first live class will be September 10th or 11th. Again, if you can send me an email if you'd rather have a Sunday class or a Saturday class. If I do Sunday, I might start earlier, like 11 Central Time. Saturday, I always start at noon. But if I have more people interested in Sunday, and this is a Sunday, you know, preview, most of you will like Sundays, and I'm fine to switching to Sundays. I just have to change my schedule around this fall, but that's fine. Okay. F, any closing comments?
No, like I said, Saturday or Sunday classes, they're both fantastic. And again, Barry, when his camera and everything works, we can do examples in class. Use your charts if you're comfortable. He's extremely clear. He answers questions. He's very patient, and he has a lot of knowledge. And like I said, he's extremely generous with his knowledge. Okay. And you will enjoy it immensely and learn a lot.
Okay, thank you, Effie. It's very hard to do self-promotion. So anyway, thank you again, and I will end the presentation and have a great rest of your Sunday.
Thank you, Barry.
Bye.
Thank you.